My name is Matt, and my childhood, it wasn't normal. Not by any stretch of the word. Something happened to my family that is almost impossible to understand, but I'm going to try my best to explain those 5 years. 5 years of my life I spent in terror. 5 years that we all lived in fear. 5 years we'll never get back. My father, Spence, wasn't a very strong man, both physically and mentally. He was the type of dad who often let our mother speak for the both of them. Now, he wasn't a complete pushover, but he often was content to just go with the flow rather than alter it. He worked hard and dedicated his free time to us, his family. He made sure our needs were taken care of, his soft assurances the unseen foundation of our family, in fact. My mother, Megan, was the head of our house. She was outspoken, independent, and extremely loyal to all of us. She loved my father's quiet ways, and even from a young age, I could see the chemistry flowing strong between them. My little sister, Stephanie, was a year younger than I. She looked up to me, and my father always told me that it was my responsibility to look after her. We got along the best as we could, and even though I gave her all kinds of brotherly hardship, I did love her. We lived in a suburban middle-class community, a complete stock photo of the American dream. My father worked a respectable 9-to-5 job, while my mother taught yoga classes out of the house. It was a neat life, organized and structured. Everything was discussed and considered and acted upon as a family. It was a good home to grow up in. But that was before he showed up. That was before the third parent. In July of 1989, I was sitting at the dinner table, waiting for my father to finish cooking. It was his turn tonight, and my stomach roared for his rosemary chicken. My sister, Stephanie, lay on her stomach in the living room, colouring. Her golden blonde hair fell across her shoulders in waves, and she looked up at me, smiling. She extended what she had been working on, and I nodded, completely unimpressed. She sniffed at me and continued her sketch. My mother walked into the kitchen, pulling her hair back from her freshly showered face. "Everyone gone?" my father asked from the stove. My mother nodded. "Yes, Spence, the house is ours again. You know, it's so much better teaching yoga in the basement. It's so much cooler. I'm glad we finished the basement over the winter. My clients are relieved as well. It's a scorcher out there today. Mum, can you sit down so we can eat?" I begged from my spot at the table. My mother turned to me and laughed. "Matt, the hungriest 6-year-old of this side of Mississippi. Why don't you ask your dad to hurry up? He's the one cooking." I placed my forehead on the table's lip. "Dad, I'm going to die." Stephanie looked up from her colouring book. "Matt, don't be crazy." "You're crazy," I muttered, not looking up. "Nuh-uh," she said, sticking her tongue out at me. All right, my father said, turning from the stove. In his hands, he held a steaming platter of chicken. "Come sit down, Steph. The food is ready." I ordered my sister, the sight of the seasoned meat causing me to salivate. As she pulled herself up from the floor, my mother taking a place beside me, we all froze as someone knocked on the front door. My mother and father exchanged puzzled looks. My dad placed the food down on the table and told us to hold on a minute. Groaning, I watched him walk to the front door. He peeked through the keyhole, and I saw him visibly tense, his whole body cementing like a statue. "Spence, who is it?" my mother asked. My father slowly turned back around to us, all blood draining from his face. His eyes were wide, and I saw fear dilate his pupils. He licked his lips and shot Stephanie and I a look. "Spence?" my mum pressed, her face contorting with concern. "No, this can't happen. Not Not again, I heard my father whisper, staring off into the middle distance. The door shook as another series of knocks echoed throughout the house. My mum stood, her voice cracking with contagious fear. Spence? Who is it? What's going on? I'm so sorry. My father mumbled, clutching his stomach, his face a pale sheet. I have to let him in. Before any of us could say anything else, my dad turned and opened the door. Dying sunlight blinded me, and I squinted to see who our unannounced visitor was.
Hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. It's good to see you again, Spence.
I watched as my father slowly backed away from the open door. A man entered our house and shut the door behind him. My young mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but even at that young age, I knew something wasn't right with this unexpected guest. He was about 6 foot and had a shock of golden hair cut tight along his scalp. He wore khaki shorts and a white t-shirt that said "Hi" in red cartoon font. But that wasn't what caught my eye. It was his skin. It was completely devoid of pores. A perfectly smooth, creamy texture that looked almost like soft plastic. His face was a pool of gentle pink, his mouth a cheerful cut along his cheeks revealing a white strip of teeth. But they weren't teeth. It was just a smooth, edgeless row like he had a mouthguard on. His nose was just a slight rise out of face, like a doll, void of nostrils. And his eyes? His eyes were twin puddles of sparkling blue, shining out at us from his flawless, eerie face. They were wide, like he was in a constant state of surprise, and they shifted around the room to look at us in quick, jarring motion. His smile widened, and he raised a flawless hand to us at the table.
Hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. It's good to meet you.
I noticed he didn't have any fingernails or skin defects. No wrinkles or bruises. Nothing. It was like he was a living, talking, human-sized doll. Spence? My mother croaked, recognition blooming in her eyes. It's going to be okay, Megan, my father said, a voice shaking. Let's just be polite to our new guest, okay? The man, Tommy, cocked his head towards my father. My dad took a step back, raising his hands. I mean, our new friend. The frozen smile never left Tommy's molded face. There was no humor in his strange laugh. It sounded like he was clearing his throat or imitating a really bad chuckle. It was too pronounced, each syllable sounding too deliberate. My father forced a smile onto his face. I meant... He looked desperately at my mother, who offered him no help, her body frozen in absolute fear. I meant, meet your new parent, kids. Stephanie, who was standing by our mother, frowned. He's not our dad. You are. Why does he look so funny? Stephanie, my mother hissed, gripping my sister's shoulder. Tommy laughed and walked forward to crouch in front of Stephanie.
It's not nice to make fun of people who look different, is it?
My sister looked at her feet, blushing. Tommy tousled her hair.
It's okay. Buck up, kiddo. We're going to get along just fine. I'm going to help your parents raise you. It's a big job being a mummy and a daddy. Sometimes, mummy and daddies need help.
Tommy turned to my parents, that ever-present plastic smile stretching his face.
I helped your mummy and daddies raise them. Isn't that right, Spence? Megan.
Megan pulled Stephanie away as my father nodded nervously. That's right, kids. He did. Tommy smiled and turned to me. I was still sitting at the table, taking this odd scene in. I didn't understand what was happening. Didn't know who this weird-looking man was or what he wanted. What he was saying didn't make sense, but my parents seemed to know him, so I kept my speculations to myself.
And you must be Matt,
Tommy said, walking over to me. I didn't look at him, training my eyes to stare at my empty plate. I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. I could feel the strange man beside me, though, his presence filling my head. I licked my lips and felt my heart begin to race. I didn't like this intruder. Something about him felt dangerous. Tommy walked behind me, chuckling, his hands sliding over my slender shoulders.
Oh, it looks like we have a shy one. That's okay. I'll help him with that,
he said to my parents. His fingers dug into my skin and I winced, but I kept my mouth shut. Don't touch him, my mother hissed, eyes going wide. Tommy looked up at her, mouth stretched. My dad outstretched his hand, alarmed. Don't be so rude, Megan. Tommy continued to stare at my mother, who nervously lowered her eyes. Are you staying for dinner? Stephanie suddenly asked, breaking the tense silence. The eerie doll man let go of my shoulders, one of his hands sliding across my cheek and into my hair.
Oh yes, I'll be here for quite a while, in fact.
And that was how Tommy Taffy entered our lives. At 6 years old, I didn't know any better than to seriously question what was happening. Even though my parents acted unsettled at his arrival, their constant assurances that he was a friend pushed away any lingering doubt I had. As the days turned into weeks, I began to grow accustomed to Tommy's presence in our house. My initial fear slowly receded into wary caution. I soon learned that Tommy didn't like company. Whenever my mother had her yoga classes, Tommy would pull her off into a corner and whisper something to her. I would watch all this with silent eyes. I would see my mother's face grow pale and she would nod, whispering back unknown assurances. Then Tommy would turn, that ever-present smile plastered on his face, and walk upstairs until the class was over. My parents told Stephanie and I that we weren't to talk about Tommy to our friends. Outside of the house, Tommy wasn't a part of our lives. I don't know why, but both my sister and I obeyed. Another thing that I noticed was that Tommy never ate. He would sit at the table with us, but never partook in the meal. Stephanie asked him once if he was ever hungry, and Tommy just smiled at her silently and stroked her head. During the evenings, he would gather our family into the living room and give us a short lesson on how to be good people. My parents never spoke during these talks, just sat next to us nodding. Tommy told us not to make fun of others, to love our friends and enemies, and always help those in need. He told us that's why he was here with us, to help my parents raise us, that we could come and talk to him if we had a problem at school, or didn't know how to handle a certain situation. It went on like this for a month, and that's when my mother lost it.